Frantz Fanon, the psychoanalyst and philosopher born at the time of this recording exactly 100 years ago in Martinique, set the foundations for post-colonial studies through his analysis of the relationship between colonized and colonizer. In Black Skin, White Mask, considered alongside The Wretched of the Earth as his most influential work, he begins the first chapter, The Black and Language, with the following statement: "To speak is to exist absolutely for the other." This seemingly simple statement grasps the core concept of this work and this video, where the profound power of language reveals itself as an instrument of both recognition or oppression. A dynamic that extends far beyond spoken words into the realm of cultural expression, including musical culture. Musical syntax shares structural similarities with language, sometimes blurring even the lines. Musical genres develop their own distinguished theories and routes to convey specific messages, accessible only to those who acquire and master these codes. As Fanon explains, to speak means being able to use a certain syntax and possessing the morphology of such and such language, but it means above all assuming a culture and bearing the weight of a civilization. Language, like musical tradition, is therefore never neutral. It carries within it an entire civilization's power relations, hierarchies, and worldviews. This dynamic becomes particularly evident in contemporary cultural exchanges. Looking at this specific article from the Bavarian radio newspaper, when the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra toured East Asia, a musician described their wish for a residential character, in that case Korea, emphasizing how our culture is so highly valued here. She was struck by what she called the incredible work discipline of Asian students. They practice all day and receive instruction, and at night the practice sometimes even continues. It's a completely different work ethic than ours, she says. You can draw a parallel here with what Frantz Fanon expresses with the following in The Colonized Antilles by the French of acquiring the real, the pure, and the original. The more the colonized has assimilated the cultural values of the metropolis, the more he will have escaped the bush. The more he rejects his blackness and the bush, the whiter he will become. The more the Black Antillean assimilates the French language, the whiter he gets, meaning the closer he comes to becoming a true human being. The colonizer's language becomes the key to humanity itself, while one's own language, Creole, is degraded as inferior. In the French Antilles, the bourgeoisie does not use Creole except when speaking to servants. This observation raises the following question: is this the same phenomenon Fanon identified as the foundation of what he calls an inferiority complex? Fanon identified the métropole, Paris for the Antillean, as the place where capital and power concentrate. This centralization creates an inferiority complex among the colonized based on the self-evaluation according to metropolitan cultural standards. This dynamic persists in contemporary cultural hierarchies where European musical centers, Berlin, Vienna, London, remain the ultimate arbiters of musical legitimacy. German literary critic Ijeoma Mangold describes the similar experience of inferiority in his autobiography Das Deutsche Krokodil. Only while writing did I realize that there are behaviors of mine that are clearly a reaction to my appearance, a prophylactic reaction, if you will. This somewhat exaggerated, polished High German that I speak so quickly is, I believe, an attempt that has always been, I don't look like a German, but just let me say one sentence and you will no longer have any doubt about my passport. Fanon observed a particular phenomenon. The black man who has been to the métropole is a demigod to the native Antillean. This observation is illustrated by contemporary examples such as the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra being celebrated like pop stars in Seoul or Asian music students who complete their education in Europe and return as more respected artists to their home countries. All this might stem in our present time from the global challenge how the commodification of success and its marketing plays, as time goes by, a bigger important role to our perception of quality rather than the time-intensive critical analysis and discourse of language and its aesthetics. The question posed to Cho Sung-jin, why are you celebrated like a pop star in Korea, in this article reveals this dynamic perfectly. Only those who have received recognition from the Metropole or Western musical institutions are seen as having achieved the highest success, while simultaneously lamenting that many don't get fairly recognized. Fanon describes this phenomenon further. So here is our new returnee. He can no longer understand Creole. He talks of the opera house, which he has probably seen only from a distance, but most of all, he assumes a critical attitude towards his fellow islanders.
I had an experience with a conductor who was of European descent. And when he saw me, he said, oh, there's no way you could ever understand Mozart or Schubert because you're Chinese and you trained in the US. I'm Korean American, first of all, so there's a difference. Nobody would say Italians are the same as Germans or the same as French, so it's different culture and country.
The persistence of colonial thinking in contemporary classical music discourse becomes evident when examining how East Asian classical musicians are perceived and discuss their experience in this article. Korean pianist Cho Sung-jin in a Berlin interview addressed this directly. Unfortunately, the prejudices against us are always the same. Good technique, but lack of emotion and imagination. I don't want to have to prove how wrong that is. This statement encapsulates, similarly to what Fanon describes as the colonized subject's burden, constantly having to prove their humanity and depth to meet the colonizer's standards. As Fanon explains, the reason is that the black man has to be portrayed in a certain way.
Will I put your medicine, Miss McCandless?
Leave it on the table.
Miss McCandless, can I get married?
But Vashti, whom do you want to marry?
Oh, nobody in particular, ma'am. I just thought I'd kind of like to get married.
Well, of course, Vashti. You may marry whenever you wish.
Oh, thank you, ma'am. Do you know anybody would be nice for me to marry?
No, I don't, Vashti, but I'll think about it.
Oh, thank you, ma'am. In no particular hurry.
Contemporary examples include the reduction of East Asian musicians to technical automatons, the stereotype of the emotionless performer, or conversely, the Orientalist fascination with Eastern wisdom and natural discipline. These caricatures serve to maintain existing power structures while appearing to offer recognition. These mechanisms have their dangers, the construction of reductive, simplified images of the other to justify one's position. This leads to the deconstruction of phenomena under critical examination while perpetuating possibly harmful myths. As Fanon writes, when someone desperately tries to prove to me that the black man is as intelligent as any white man, my response is that neither did intelligence save anybody, for if equality among men is proclaimed in the name of intelligence and philosophy, it is also true that these concepts have been used to justify the extermination of men.
My source is here. I always quote it. One of my favorite passages from Jacques Lacan, where he says, it's a male chauvinist example, I would prefer to turn it around, but nonetheless. Let's say I'm married, I have a wife, and I'm jealous that she is sleeping around with other men all the time. And Lacan says something beautiful. He says, even if all my suspicions are true, she really is doing it, my jealousy is still a pathological thing. Because the point of my jealousy is not is it true or not, but why do I need this fixation of jealousy to assert my identity? That's why, now comes the more problematic part. I'm coming to you as a Jew. I think, not in the sense that Nazis were right, but the same goes for anti-Semitism. Let's say we are in Germany. You like Jews, I don't like them, all is a fiction. But we debate in 37, and you claim, but nonetheless, nonetheless, some of the things that Nazis are claiming about Jews are true. You deny it. Let's look at objective facts. Some of the things were true. It's true that 60% of art critics in Berlin were Jews. That Jews were seducing German girls. Well, I hope they did, and vice versa, you know. Jews were rich. Yes, some of them were. Not so if you even accept at this level the debate, we should also clarify this. It's not to say it doesn't matter, but you have already sold your soul to the devil, because the result will be this type of, yeah, maybe Nazis exaggerate a little bit, but nonetheless the truth is in the middle. No, the truth is not in the middle, because irrespective of fact, Nazi anti-Semitism was a fake in its subjective function. The point was to project onto the Jew external intruder, we know the Marxist story. The cause of antagonism, to deny that society in itself antagonistic, and so on and so on.
Drawing on Hegel's dialectics, Fanon explains the dynamic between self and other. As Hegel writes, self-consciousness is in and for itself, when and by the fact that it is for another, that is, it exists only in being recognized. This philosophical foundation explains why the self can never exist in isolation. For white and black to exist as distinct categories, they must immediately relate to each other, otherwise they fall back into pure emptiness. From this position of becoming other than itself, of inequality in substance, from this position of contamination by the opposite, the substance can look back and determine in retrospect what it was in its emptiness. As you can see here, Mladen Dolar, the Slovenian philosopher, explaining it.
Why does this self, any self, do it? It doesn't do it because it's externally pushed to pass into its other, because there's some external violence done to it. It's out of its own spring, out of its own nature, let's say, or absence of nature, non-identifiable nature, the nature which cannot coincide with itself, that it has to pass into its other in order to be anything at all. And one other way to present this idea is the idea of the fall. You can take the fall in the biblical sense. Like, there was a paradise, and then there is a fall from paradise. This is the narrative which is usually given. But Hegel's idea of the fall is that we start with the fall. We start with the fall. And paradise, which existed before, when an entity was supposedly itself, is a retroactive construction. So things have to fall in order to be themselves. I mean, they are not themselves in the supposed paradise of their self-identity.
Fanon writes, when the self-conscious encounters the resistance of the other, it experiences desire, the first stage of the path that leads to the dignity of the spirit. Only after that they have fallen out of this unity do they gain themselves, yet this self-gaining always goes hand in hand with losing themselves again in the opposite. They gain themselves only in the opposite, that is, in another. In this context, Hegel uses the concept of becoming other. In the musical context, our and other musical traditions define themselves against each other. The Western classical tradition needs its other to maintain its sense of superiority and authenticity, while non-Western musicians find themselves trapped in a cycle of seeking recognition from the very system that positions them as fundamentally different. Fanon makes clear that the goal is not to appeal to humanity to prove equality. The human is human only to the extent to which he tries to impose himself on another human in order to be recognized by. As long as they have not been effectively recognized by the other, it is this other who remains the focus of his actions. The human worth and reality depend on this other and on this recognition by the other. That is in this other that the meaning of the life is condensed. The expectation that East Asian musicians are supposedly free to conform to Western classical traditions demands, while remaining perpetually marked by metaphysical concepts of other and ours, exemplifies this trap. When confronted with deeper hermeneutical questions about musical interpretation and cultural meaning, the response is often, "You are thinking too much, just play," essentially, stay where you are. But what if the word our culture and other culture is maybe just that, a sign of respect for otherness?
Many left liberals have this position: the further you are from white male identity, the more you are allowed to, I simplify analysis very much now, the more you are allowed to assert your identity. If the First Nation, Native Americans do it, okay. Blacks, okay. Then Chinese, still okay. Italians, so-so. Germans, blah, blah. But if white Protestants assert their... okay, now you'll say, but this is correct, because they are de facto hegemonic, and so on. What I suspect is that nonetheless, this self-humiliation, this we renounce our identity because we know if we assert our identity, it means direct racist hegemony. There is something false in it because, I had a couple of weird experiences. For example, this really deeply marked me. A debate 25, 30 years ago in Missoula, Montana, where there were some politically correct white critics of white supremacy who were so brutally correcting some Native Americans there, like, no, you shouldn't call yourself Indians. And then a Native American guy who became my great friend said something perfect. He said, sorry, I don't want to be called Native American because it gives me horrible associations, like I'm native nature, you are culture, or what. And he said something wonderful. He said, I prefer to be called Indian. At least my name is a monument to your white man's stupidity. You thought you are...
Fanon proposes that liberation occurs not through educating the oppressor, but through teaching the oppressed to recognize and transcend their internalized limitations. Liberation comes through developing the capacity to hear one's individual call to responsibility. The path forward requires enduring the productive tension of becoming other to oneself while maintaining personal integrity, speaking the language of power while transforming it from within, using the master's tools while creating new possibilities to human recognition and dignity. Holocaust survivor Boris Cyrulnik confirms this insight. Speaking differentiated language promotes resilience. The expansion of structure and recognition makes it possible to endure the tension of contradiction. Also, hip-hop emerges as the center of resilience, an art form arising from the tension between oppression and expression, challenging and transforming traditional hierarchies. Fanon understands that it is natural for the black man to want to speak French, that for it is the key that can open doors. The problem remains what Hegel presents in the fall of the substance and the desire to return to the pure. So, how to deal with tensions and the fall in present times where cancel culture seems to be the go-to variant to constitute an identity? People practicing it may act too hastily given the fact that its own substance emerges through its other antagonist, therefore falsely concluding that the elimination of the other will support the constitution of the self. Alternatively, Theodor Adorno, the German philosopher, proposes with his negative dialectics that this exact moment where the non-identical flashes up and the contradictions of totality become visible makes the subject itself visible, underlining the importance to keep contradictions itself open for recognition. Therefore, the conclusion may lie in not returning to a supposedly pure origin, like Fanon said, but in the ability to endure the tension between self and other, between one's own and the foreign, between traditional and modernity and its mutual recognition, as Léon Damas captures this tension in OK.
Ma mère voulant d'un fils mémorandum. Si votre leçon d'histoire n'est pas sue, vous n'irez pas à la messe dimanche avec vos effets des dimanches. Cet enfant sera la honte de notre nom, cet enfant sera notre nom de Dieu. Taisez-vous. Vous ai-je dit ou non qu'il vous fallait parler français? Le français de France, le français du français, le français français.